Hello, this is Yosef of 52Frames. If you don't know what 52Frames is, definitely go to 52frames.com to join our amazing weekly photo challenge project. Why wouldn't you? My only request for this screencast critique is, especially if you're watching this on Facebook, is to watch in HD. Please hit that HD button because it does make a difference. This is from our album, week number 48, Abandon, which I think is a very cool challenge because it can really tap into an emotion when you think about a subject being abandoned. And also I thought the extra credit challenge was really cool to shoot an abandoned building. And we see some brave, courageous framers went out and did that. So I want to just run through a couple of these photos that I pulled out from the album. And I think a general theme, I didn't really look at these carefully, but I think some themes that I'd like to discuss, some recurring themes rather, that kind of, I sensed a pattern throughout the images that I pulled out. One is composition. Two is shooting with, depending on what type of gear that you have, just general noise and image quality. And three is HDR. I want to end with how I process HDR because I actually have never seen this tutorial given the way I do it, except on Adobe's site where I found it. So you can stick around for that at the end. Okay. Fran is a longtime framer. And oops, sorry about that. And Fran, sorry to call you out here, but I know who you are and I see your name here. But Fran, I must say that you are a very good example of someone that I've seen improvement very clearly, because we see you week to week. And I think especially when you started, you were generally, taking on the project as a fun challenge of what you can snap each week. And I think with the feedback, you started taking it more seriously as far as setting up your shot composition. I think this is a very good example of the improvement that I see in your photos because you really took care to create some symmetry, to have some shape. You thought about how to shoot it. I see there was intentionality. With that said, not knowing that story, just looking at this photo, for me, it immediately screams taken with a phone. And I did some research on, if you look over here in the bottom left part of the screen, on just these few photos that I pulled out, what was the gear that people were shooting on, which is pretty cool that I can see that instantly. We see a Canon 70D, a 60D, a Rebel T3, and then we see these, I looked it up, these were point and shoots. I believe they were Olympus point and shoots. And then we see a Nikon D810, a 3100, a 5200. And okay, so I see you shot this with a Canon PowerShot, which is actually a type of point and shoot camera, a very large point and shoot camera. And when I look at the settings here of all of the images that I pulled out that were shot with a non-DSLR camera, it's not across the board that they're all a certain look. I think that it really depends on how you're shooting, how you're processing, but something to look out for is digital zoom. Never digital zoom, because you're basically you're cropping it. You're not actually zooming in. And the way you're processing once you're on the computer, and of course, how you're shooting, the right time of day. I know I'm not really giving concrete advice here, but I hope it at least helps to shape your mind, and maybe we can bring up some other examples. This is another interesting one that I thought was composed very well. I really like the symmetry. I like the straight lines. I like that you were very low to the ground. And there's something about this image that I feel could be improved, and I think that is your blown out highlights. We're seeing a lot of blown out highlights here where it means there's no data here in the whites. It is too bright for the camera. for a scene like this, it kind of begs for HDR, which is a high dynamic range image, where you simply take a photo that's higher exposure, where you're getting the shadows in detail, and then you take another picture without moving the camera, and you take a lower exposure so that you're getting this detail where the sun is shining. And then you can merge the two in an HDR program or in Photoshop. Some people take 3 photos, some people take 5 or 7. The more photos you take, the more control you have as to the range that you're having. But we're going to get back to this HDR conversation in a bit. But this is, I think, a great example of where HDR could come in handy, because HDR is not just blown out colors, crazy detail. It's about the dynamic range. It's about getting the shadows and getting the highlights. It's about getting that balance in the same shot, because your camera is not as advanced as your human eye. It only has so much range, especially digital cameras. And that's where HDR comes in. But we'll get more detail on that in a bit. This one is an interesting shot. It also seems flat to me, meaning the image quality. And I'm seeing this was also shot with this Panasonic, I believe it is a point and shoot. So, maybe your ISO, maybe 800 for a point and shoot is too high. Maybe you need to switch to manual and make sure your ISO is low, or try some test shots of the same subject at ISO 100, 200, 400, 800, see where it starts to get a little bit grainy, because there's something flat about the image, the quality of the image itself. And of course, you have a timestamp on the image, which, if you're taking a family snap, it may be nice to have. If you want to get more serious about your photography, you probably don't want to have something that's going to detract your attention away from what you're shooting, like numbers and the time that you shot it, although you did shoot it this week, so good job. This one I think is very cool. 2 things that I noticed that I could critique quickly. One, there seems to be a very bold processing move here, almost just a circular stamp of white, which probably was intentional, but a bit too, you want to make usually you want to make the edits that you lighten, these small adjustments, a bit more subtle. And 2, it does seem like we have some slow shutter speed shake. And obviously that's how you got this cool effect where this what looks like a swinging child is blurry, but we're not seeing any EXIF here, but you're also getting some blur on these posts as well. One way to achieve that is put your camera on a table. Put it on a tripod. If the camera isn't moving, then everything that's stationary in the shot will be nice and sharp, and anything that's moving will be blurry. This one I really like, and this I thought was just a good example of, when we say intentionality, because this is very gritty, right? When I'm talking about the image quality, how it's a flat image quality, a lot of noise, I felt detrimental in other shots. Here, you use it to your advantage. You use it, you make it intentional. You overlay this very interesting, looks like a cement abstract texture over the image. I thought it was very cool. This again, I wonder, and I don't mean to be harsh. I know that first of all, there are people that participate in 52 frames that really, they want to participate. They want to submit a photo, look out for a photo, have that in their week. They're not professional photographers. They're not looking to be a professional photographer. It's just almost a fun treasure hunt, if you will. And I think that's fine. I think that's great. Use that. But for the sake of learning, and also some people have off weeks. Like I have off weeks where I just have to go out and take a photo of a rock, and I wouldn't want that photo critiqued. I would want to say like, yeah, actually that was an off week. So I don't mean to critique your style in general, but if I could make an example of this photo, would this photo be exhibited? Would somebody want to share this photo with other people? If they would, what would they say? What would they say about this photo? Check out this photo. It seems more like a snapshot rather than a photograph. And a snapshot is what many people do, where they take their phones out of their pockets and they snap a scene. Maybe they share it with their friends. Maybe it just stays on their phone. A photograph is something where you're looking at the scene. You're thinking about what you want to create. You're bringing up the camera to your face with a certain sense of intentionality, of purpose. And you then tweak all of your settings, and you shoot and you retweak and you shoot and you retweak until you paint that picture. And I feel like there was something that you were trying to give, and being that this theme is abandoned, perhaps you're showing the empty room, but what I'm seeing is a library. I'm seeing books. If I were in this room and I had these horrible lights to work with and that's all I had, I would maybe get on the floor. First things first, get low. That's always a more interesting angle. And I would shoot maybe the legs of the chairs. That could be interesting. That could be a little bit different. Or I would get, much wider, or shoot it from the ceiling. This to me is standing straight and shooting straight from eye level. So I just wanted to point that out as far as like, what is your story? Really think of your story. This one I really like. The couch seems nice and sharp. Again, this probably could also use some HDR processing because these whites are blown out. But it does seem like you have some shake back there. Your shutter is 1/20. So I don't know if you were handheld or not. That is a bit slow. So you may have had some shake there in the distance. This one I love. This is a really lovely image. I think I had this. I'm trying to think of a critique, and the truth is, I like it. I'm trying to think of what I would do differently, but it's more styling. Like, I would do things differently because I have a different style, but I like it. I mean, a good example of just showing what you want to show. You have good light on your subject. It's nice and dramatic with the darks. I think it's really well done. So here, this looks like some kind of HDR processing. My quick critique for this is you're too close. You're too cropped into your subject. Sometimes you do want to fill the frame, and if you wanted to fill the frame with your subject, that's fine. I would fill the frame, something like that, if you cropped it that way. But this is you're almost showing the whole chair, but your legs are chopped off here. And, I like to use the term headspace when shooting a subject because usually you want to have some space on top of your subject's head in a photo. But I think that also applies to any object. And I think it also applies to foot space, where in this case, you're chopping off this poor chair's legs. Okay, so here is an example of HDR gone wild. Okay, we have these bands. You're starting to see the image fall apart. You're seeing these bands and this digital noise and distortion. The colors are overly saturated, and you're gonna see halo effects, I'm sure. So we're gonna get back to this. It is a cool image. It's cool. You may want to print it and put it on the wall. It's arty, it's creative. I don't nix over processing HDR as long as you understand that's what you're doing, right? So I want to show a little bit later on how I would process something like this. This one I absolutely adore. This is great. Also just paying attention to your background. The only thing I would do is I would probably crop these windows out. I don't think the bottom of these windows are adding to this composition. It also seems a little bit warped. So if you cropped it just underneath, I think this would be flawless. But I really like it. And if there was some way we can get that sign maybe to move, pay attention to your background. That's really what this week's challenge is about. This one is just a lovely image submitted by Beth. Beth, this is just beautiful, really painterly, really achieved a dramatic effect here. Is that a leaf? Okay, I was gonna say you may have dirt on your lens, but that's okay, that's a leaf. Here again, I would just pay attention to your background. I think it's an interesting composition. I think it works for the theme also. Maybe you could have cropped here. I don't know if this is adding to the story, this part. But we're also seeing tennis courts. And maybe that was your intention, but I don't see the connection between the swings and the tennis court. It looks like that was just your background. Maybe there was interesting trees to, on this side, and you could have rotated. But in general, I do like the setup. I would have walked around more and maybe seen if there was a better angle. This one is really nice. I like how you kept the subject sharp so that we're just looking at the subject. Here I would point out that maybe if this was at all possible to show this element of okay, so here we have the scene in front of us. Homeless guy, unfortunately a typical scene, sitting on a bench waiting for what looks like a subway. And you want to show that he's abandoned. Well, this is one way to show it. Another way could have been getting super wide or going on the other side of the tracks, if that was possible, and showing him with nothing around him. Again, it may not have been possible. Maybe if you had a tripod set up, you could have done it. Taken a couple shots, so in post you can make it look empty. But something like that, to think of how you're crafting your story. This story may have been crafted better if you're seeing him with a wide open space, because that makes him look more abandoned when there's nothing around him. Just something to think about. Here, as far as framing, it looks like you're just looking up. For me, I would love to see the ground. And I saw this come up, here in Jedra's photo, which I really like. And I could have shot this same photo, but looking at it in hindsight, I also feel like the bottom is cropped out, that you're looking up. And I think it would be advantageous, perhaps because we're seeing this arch, but we're not seeing the bottom of it. And that goes back to cropping off the legs. Again, if you wanted to, fill the frame, be more dramatic, you can crop it a bit more aggressively. But for this, it just seems like we're missing the bottom. This one I love. This is a great example of filling the frame with your subject, and this very interesting texture and colors. This is lovely. I'd put that on my wall. Okay, I had pulled out a few more photos, but for the sake of time, I really wanted to show you this HDR processing. This one I really like, just more what I call head space, but I guess this would be foot space. Here's an example of a really nice attempt at HDR because it does look mostly natural. It is a bit more detailed than usual, but then we're seeing this snow is dark, right? Why would the snow here on the roof be darker than the snow over here? So there's an imbalance happening here, and you're seeing some halo on the trees. That's this white shine, this white ring around the tree, and that usually indicates over processing on HDR. So I just want to quickly show you how I process HDR images, which is a very recent find based on something I found on Adobe's site, which I haven't seen anywhere else. Okay, so this was these are my photos, and these are my actual photos from this week. It was a lot of fun. Went with our 52 Frames resident tour guide, Yonatan Mishal, to an abandoned building. So I pulled out, the way I do it is I put 3 stars and a red label to tell me that that's HDR. So we'll just choose one of them as an example. And again, this is done in Adobe Camera Raw. For those of you that don't use Adobe Camera Raw, this little tutorial may not be as relevant, but I think the concept still holds. I've tried HDR with Photomatix, I've tried with Photoshop, I've tried with a Lightroom plugin called Infuse, and I didn't like any of the results. I found they took an extremely long time, and this process is super quick, and I found to have the best results, meaning the most balanced. And basically you select all the images in Camera Raw, and when you right click now in the latest version, it has a merge to HDR in-house. You don't even have to bring it into Photoshop. What it does, it shows you relatively basically what the image looks like. If you have anything moving in the photo, you can opt to de-ghost if you have like moving trees, and it'll help take away that blur. We don't have to align images because I was on a tripod, and it will save it as a DNG, which is Adobe's format of a raw file. So it brings this in a new photo now, DNG. It combines it immediately, and immediately we can see that there is an overall balance. We're seeing a lot more of the scene than any one of the photos that I took. But I wouldn't want the image to look like this. I'd really want to lower the exposure. So take a look at the exposure. Right now it says it was up 3 stops. You actually now have 10 stops in either direction to go crazy. So you now have this latitude on a raw photo in the Camera Raw dialog, which for me is amazing. So I would actually want it a bit darker, a bit more moody. So you may ask, well, so what's the difference between this one and let's say this one that I took? Well, if I go back and forth, you can see the difference in the wall here, because this white is a bit blown out, and here we have a much more balanced white. The whites are more balanced. I'm going for balance. I'm not going for over the top. You could go for over the top. Something that I want to do in HDR is I want that dynamic range to be natural. And then I could take my adjustment brush and I have the same latitude. So let's say I want this graffiti to really shine. I can up the exposure as much as I want. There's no noise there because it's basing it on the other exposures that I have. I can make it as dark as I want. So you really have full control. I want to take this shadow and make it look like daylight. I have that balance now with these brushes. It's amazingly powerful. I'll just show you quickly what the final photo looked like for this one, for this processing. Here. So that's how I finished it off. I gave it a cool tone. I brought in a lot more detail in Photoshop. I like that HDR look where you're getting a lot of detail and you're getting those shadows, but it's more subtle. See here, you're seeing the shadow, but that's just what I wanted to show, not over the top. And you're getting the detail, but again, it's not getting crunchy. You're not seeing halos. I think it's a more balanced image. All right, guys, I hope this helped. Sorry for the speed, but I really wanted to get through a lot of things quickly. Really excited about next week's challenge. If you haven't already joined us, definitely check out 52frames.com and join our amazing weekly photo challenge project. This is Yosef. In the meantime, happy shooting.